Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we're Masechtas Nedarim daf Nun Vav. We are going to begin on the top of Nun Vav Amud Alpha, the top line by the new Mishnah. Hanoder Mastisa, Hanoder min Abayis. A person made a neder regarding a house. Not going to go into a house. Mutter ba'aliyah. You're allowed to go to the upper story, and Rashi says she'ein aliyah b'chlal bayis, because the upper story is not considered to be part of the house. When you say bias, it refers to the ground level. Chachamim say aliyah b'chlal habayis. No, that's not true. When you say bias, it includes also the upper floors as well. However, you say I'm not going to go to the aliyah, which is the top floors, then everyone agrees that that does not include the bias. Okay, so the question is the machlokas, what does the word bias mean? Does it include the aliyah? But aliyah certainly does not include the bias. So let's see the Gemara. Man Tana, who is the following Tana, based on the following pasuk in Vayikra? Regarding saras, it says bebase or bebayas. It's referring to getting saras on one's house, niki botim. Rabas es hayatzia. It's coming to include even that which is attached. Even that which is attached. Says the Ran, Tanya, so kachi hagirsa benuschois. The Yomer Taisus, the Loy Garcin Ledaha, Tarskanim Tanya Ibcha, Bikiras Abayis, Lo Bikiras Hayitzia. It's actually brought down elsewhere, the opposite. That there, when it says house, it's only referring dafka to the house as saras, but not that which is attached. Wafikach, says the Ran, Kasav Harav Ramosha Bar Shner Zal Deloy Garcin and Hachiyatzia Ella Savua. Rather, the language instead of saying Yatzia is Savua, a dyed house, D-Y-E-D. Kloimer, Bayis Savua, if you have a house which is dyed b'minit sivoinim with various colors, the Isra Chariboy, and we need to include a house which is dyed, you would think you would learn out from clothing. When it comes to dyed garments, it's not matamim begodim. Dechsiv tsemer pishtim, ma pishtim shlo nishtanu, am tsemer shlo nishtanu kamash mariboy. This is actually question 1. Bayis savua obeget savua imatamim begodim. Ran only. So the Ran says that this is actually the Gemara over here is not supposed to have the girsa of a hayatzia, but rather of tsoiveya. In fact, you can see there's the Hagais Agra. It says on the side hayatzia tzarach lemer hatzavoa ayin ran. So that's what the Hagra reminds us also of this Ran, is that the Chiddush is that when it comes to garments, if it's dyed garments, it's not tamim negoyim. However, that's only by nigi begodim. Now, when it comes to saras on houses which are dyed, the din is that it is still tamei. Okay, so let's continue. Then the Gemara says bebase. Well, Ralbo says say aliyah. It's coming to include the upper floor. So let's not lose sight of what we're trying to do over here. We had a machlokus when it came to a house. If you made a neder regarding the house, does that include the aliyah? So Rameir says that it does not include the aliyah. But over here, we're saying when it comes to saras, it does include the aliyah. So Rameir, perhaps this is like Rameir. How's that like Rameir? It sounds like the opposite. No, pumfakert. That's why you need a drasha, a special drasha to include the upper story. In other words, Rameir says that the upper story is not the same thing as a house. Over here, the fact that you need a riboy, it must be to show you, again, like Rameir, that the aliyah is not part of the house. Because the Rabbanan, the Ami Rabbanan aliyah b'chlal habayis, salam likra, babayis riboy, you don't need a pasuk. It's just davar pasha. If it's a house, an aliyah is part of the house. So the aliyah is part of the house, so you don't need a pasuk to include it. So it must be only like the shita of Rameir. So Gemara says, really, it's like the Rabbanan. So why do they need a pasuk? So by Kra, they also need this pasuk. Why would you think that the aliyah is not included when it comes to saras? The Sagdat Chamina. bebeis eretz achuzaschem. Since the pasuk says bebeis eretz achuzaschem, it says the word land. So ksiv the mechober ba'ara shmei bias. Maybe when it comes to saras, it's davka something in which is actually attached to the ground, like connected directly onto the ground. Aliyah halo mechaber ba'ara. However, the earth, the upper floor is not connected to the land. It's connected to the floor below it, but that's not maybe enough. And therefore, for that reason, you would maybe think the aliyah does not count when it comes to Nigibatim. That's why even the Rabbanan, who normally would say that the aliyah is part of the house, you would maybe think that would be excluded over here. That's why we need a pasuk as a reboy. Who's this like? Bias. The person says, Bias bebeisi ani moichelcha. A house of my houses I am selling to you, which is an interesting poetic language that this person used. Bias bebeisi. So marehu aliyah. So we show him the upper floor, says the Ran. Imrotza moicher. If he wants to sell it, he can say to the buyer, aliyah mecharti l'cha. I was selling to you my upper floor. Avav Guria, even though it may be not of the same quality, because a person would rather be on the ground floor, you don't have to go up and down those steps or a ladder. In this situation, the buyer has the lower hand, and therefore the seller can say, I was just selling you the upper floor. I was selling you a house of my house. In other words, perhaps one way of reading it is I was selling you the house which is above my house. That's what I was selling to you. Of a bias stam, but if you only mention the word bias, but you don't say the language of bias babesi, you can't show them the upper floor, because bias l'chayra is only referring to the bottom floor. So lame Rameir. Again, this sounds like Rameir, because Rameir says the bottom floor. When you say bias, we're thinking that means bottom floor. So therefore, if you say bias stam, it must be like Rameir like this. So I feel like Rabbanan. The Rabbanan entertain even the aliyah. So my aliyah me'ula shibabatim. When you said aliyah, it means just a general statement. The nicest house, namely the main floor. Person would, it's me'ula, it's greater to be able to be on the bottom floor. Says the Ran, the Kivandi Amrle bias bevesi tzarich levar lo hamula. We have to look at which one is better, and if they're of the same layout, so then we would understand the bottom floor is better. But davka di'amr bias bevesi, however bias stam lo el marehu garua. Okay, fine. Fine. So let's see the next Mishnah. Masnisan. Hanoidim and Hamita, a person who makes this interesting neder, I'm not going to sleep in a bed, in this particular bed. So mutter b'dargash. He's allowed to sleep in a dargash, and which means a dargash, which we're going to see is the type of a cot. We'll discuss exactly what that is. We're not sure what that is right now. So the din is you're allowed to sleep on this dargash, which obviously means Rameir, similar to the same line of reasoning Rameir above, when it came to the bottom floor versus the upper floor, so too when you say bed, it excludes other things, it includes the dargash. Chacham says no, it is included. Hanoider min hadargash mutar b'mita. Similar flow of the previous Mishnah, a person made a neder regarding this specific type of thing, a dargash, you're allowed to sleep in a bed. Gemara, my dargash. What does this mean? A dargash. So Omer Ula Arsa de Gada. Now, what is an Arsa de Gada? So let's look at, the Ran says similar. Let's look at the Rashi. Mita she'orichina yisla mazel. It's a special bed that it's there in order to be able to create goodwill, like good luck. Ve'inshum adam yashin aleha. It's actually not something that person would sleep on, but it's some type of bed that's in a person's home, which brings about something good. Fine. And he quotes Gemara and Shabbos, which apparently this is something which is through maybe not a good thing, but nonetheless, that's how we're entertaining in the Havamina. So he said, Haditnan, but we learned, it says in the Mishnah, in Moed Katan, I believe, Keshehin Mavrin oiso, when a person is serving a king, kol amasubin al aretz, everyone should be basically lying and reclining on the ground. Umesav al hadargash, and he, the king, will be on a dargash. Kula shata, everyone's drinking. Lo yatev Allah, don't sit with him. Hahu yoima yasev Allah, but on that day you can sit with him. So the whole point is not the drinking, but the dargash. Says the Rashi, bitmi mechal de dargash lav arsa de gadahu, because as we said, a bed, which is a darga, which is a arsa de gada, people don't sleep on. So it's not something which a person really lies down. It's just some type of ornament or some decoration in the house for mazel, but it's not really something in which is of any real functioning purpose of lying down on it, which here it sounds like the king is lying down on it. So that must not be what a dargash is. So maskav ravina midid havi abas v'yayin. Really, it's comparable to meat and wine. The kula shata all year, iboy ochel v'iboy lo ochel. If you want, you can eat. If you don't have to. Hu yama anan yavinun lei. But today, we give it to him. It says Rashi mishum dechsev v'yayin lamari nefesh. Even if the person who's in a velos doesn't typically drink wine, but we give wine lamori nefesh. Even though you're right, normally it's not something which a person sits on. But it's interesting, perhaps it's a raya, it's a mazel, it creates good mazel maybe. So maybe that is someone who's in a velos should davka sit on such a thing. Aloha kasha, the sanya, dargash, lohaya kofehu, elazaikfai. It says when it comes to a dargash, it was not, you don't lie it down, but rather you can keep it up. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to kfias hamita, which is part of the process of avelos, is basically overturning the beds, or which causes a person to lie down on a low surface, like we sit in a low surface, person is sitting shiva. So that is that's what's done with this dargash. Now v'yamr nothing. The v'yamr arsa gadahu. If it's an arsa gada v'sanya hakayfes mitaso, when you turn over beds, lo mitaso bavad hu kayfe, not just your own bed, el kol mitais, all beds sheishlo b'toy chabayis hu kayfe. So clearly, the fact is that since you have to turn over every single bed, and it's telling you don't have to switch, you don't have to do anything to this thing, must be it's not a bed. It's not a bed. So how could we say that arsa gada, which is a mita, that just again people don't sleep on this bed, but it's still called a mita? It must be this is something which is really not a mita. Halukasha, as we continue to nun vav amud beis. It could be comparable to a bed which is designated for putting various vessels on. The sanya im that if you have a bed in which what you do is you just put vessels or things on it, then you also don't have to, even though it is a bed. So it's possible it is a bed, and it could be what we're talking about, but it's not something which a person sleeps on, so you don't have to turn it over. So again, it's not a raya. Okay. If you want to ask me a kasha, this is the kasha. Sanya Rishim Gemul Oimer Dargash. When it comes to a dargash, matir karbitov, you're supposed to unloosen karbitov. Rashi says ulaot shabo, the loops. But who noifel me'elav, and by doing that, the dargash just falls apart by itself. Now v'i dargash ars the gadahu. If a dargash is an ars the gada, karbitin mi islay. So obviously a visual would help over here, but clearly this type of item does not have loops. So an ars negada does not have loops. Says Rashi, Hachi kimluhu dolihavilhu karbitin. We're telling you it doesn't. Shenu asuya was sparik. It's not something which is dismantled. El omenes mutsas olam, basically stays in one way forever. So again, by virtue of the fact that it mentions this whole notion of the loops, it must be that a dargash is not referring to this type of bed. Kios rabin omer shiilte halhu rabbanan v'rav tachlifa bar marabba shmei dahavi shchiach meshuka titzelo a. He was constantly found by marketers who sell their leather, these leather workers. That's what they do. Rashi says, Moichri oilois, the Armali, and they said to me, my dargash arsidat sala. It's referring to this type of leather bed of sorts. As Rashi, shel or shiyashin aleha, that people actually slept on it. It's not so chashuv l'hachi l'hachi. Hoyel ve'enu chashuva lo hoya koifa el zaykva. You don't have to do anything to this bed. Hilkach arminu v'masnisa the mutal b'dergash she'enu meita chashuva. It's not really a chashuva bed. The Yarsa Tzala Isla Karbitin, and this does have loops. Okay, fine. Itmar Ezo Mita ve'Ezo Dargash. So that's how we're establishing. Look at Ran. The Ran says Mita shel or v'Toilin Ritsuos b'Svasa or Saviv. It's a bed of leather, and they would hang leather straps on the edges all around it. Skipping Kabbalah to Kadeshli is Kalkel Ha'or, so you don't destroy the leather, B'lachluach HaKarka, by the moisture of the ground, Shohay Rashi Karav Gavoyan, because by the sides, they're not very high up. Sirugo Lamala Armatana Kamad Enu Koifeu. You don't have to put it down. The Kaimer Abigmil, the Matir Karbitav, just remove the loop, so that's enough. In other words, because we don't want you to ruin the leather, so we're being lenient in that situation. They don't have to just you don't have to put it onto the ground. You don't have to do kfiyas hamita. So what is a bed? What is a dargash? Rabbi Yirmi Amita Misuragin Osal Gaba. So when it comes to a bed, it has straps and loops on the above it. Says the Ran Hachavalim Marchivin al rucha samita, that you have ropes on the lengthwise. Dargash misargin oisa magufo. However, a dargash, it has straps or loops in the inside. Meisve clay eitz, when it comes to a vessel which is made out of wood. At what point is it susceptible to become tame? So hamita, if it's a bed, baharisa, or a crib, mishiyashufeim, or hadog, when a person smears it with this fish hide. Ve'imita mistareges, if you're going to tell me that it's mistareges al gaba, that a person will take for a bed these straps of on the length, lemli shifas or hadag. Why do you need to smear it with this fish hide? That shouldn't be necessary. Why? It says the Ran, Bahari Mechusos Hain. Tamid, they're constantly covered Barashi Hachavolim by the ropes, Hamasuragin al Gabi Hamita. Why put this on if it's always covered anyway? So it must be that that's not really the design. Elohavaha Megufan. Really, both of them are the straps and the ropes are going on the inside. Mita. However, when it comes to a bed, says the Ran, b'nikavim shel ruchos machnis and moitzin rosh hachevel. You have these loops on the length, and they go in and out by the edge of the rope. So it's almost like tying shoes, back and forth, back and forth. Dargash uli v'afuke ba'avakta. However, when it comes to the dargash, it's bi'avakta, in which the Ran says, Ulos, these loops, taluyas benikvei aruchosav, they're hanging by the holes on the length. V'hen machnisin rashi ritzuos, when you put in the loops, the straps, hatuliyas b'svasa or, they're hanging by the edge of the leather. Okay, so it's a slightly different design in the way it's constructed. Amrav Yaakov bar Acha Rabbi Mita shenak liteha yoitzin zoikvan b'dayai. When it comes to a bed, if its poles go out straight, that is sufficient. So what is that referring to? Says the Ran. Naklitin beis eitzim. Naklitin, which we also say in Masechta Sukkah, nakliti amita. The first parak in the Yud Aleph range over there, there's two pieces of wood, aruchos, which are long, shemamidin oisim b'mita, that are put into a bed, echad mirashoseha ve'echad miragoseha, one at the head of the bed, one at the foot of the bed. Umanichin kaneh mizu mizeh, and they put a reed from this side to that. Va'alav porshim hakila, and then they spread over a canopy over it. It almost looks like a tent. Okay, so so the Ran says you can't do anything to that bed to fall apart. Just put it straight up, so you can't sleep. Obviously, if it's not horizontal, you put it up vertically, and that's enough. Okay, so let's see a couple questions. Question TB2. Nedarim in a bias. I guess I didn't do this one yet. Nedarim in a bias. He mutter ba'aliyah. So, a person who made a neder with a house, is he mutter to the aliyah? So it's actually, let's say it's a machlokas. The Mishnah has a machlokas if you are neder a bias, if that also includes the aliyah. Okay, so that is pretty clear cut, straight from our Mishnah. It's a machlokas, which is the very, very top of what we did on the top of the Amud. So this is TB2. And then it says, so this was also over here, that a person said this statement of bias ani moichelacha. So exactly what is the din? This is what I wrote. Here you said bias, which is a machlokas, unless you said it to mean ma'ul b'shuba bias, the best, the better property, which then would include the aliyah. Okay, let's see what the answer is. So again, pluta machlokas, the hein legabi mekach. So too when it comes to a mekach. It's all they want you to say. But when it comes to this purchase, also there is a machlokas as well. Okay. That was TB2. TA1. Ezamita ein avel chaylach vaisa, v'gam loy lezaykva. What type of a bed is not necessary for you, an avel, to have to turn it over, and also not to put it up? Because a kilat chasanim, which has this one on the top, which they throw the sheet over, that does require to be zaykif. But a mita, which is miuchedes l'kelim, as well as an arsa de gada, that is not necessary. So that's two answers. This is TA1, which we saw on the top of Amud Beis, as well as arsa de gada. Fine. Okay, weiter. Let's see the next Mishnah. Hanoider masnisa. Nedarim here. Person makes a neder from a city. I'm not going to go into a particular city. You're allowed to go into its tchum. The tchum is within the 2,000 amos of the city, Shalir. But also ibura. But you're not allowed to go into the ibura. Like an ibur is a woman who's pregnant, which is an extension. So this is referring to 70 2/3 amos to a city, which is discussed at great length, which we saw in Masechtas Eruvin. So that is part of the city, because when it comes to the measurements, we consider if there's a little house, discuss again Masechtas Eruvin, which is within that distance. So the counting of Tchum Shabbos only begins from that little house, and not from the city. So therefore, this little house is directly linked to the city. It says Rashi, Hainu pogum nichnas pogum yoitzi shel. And instead of it being flush, there's some houses which are jagged. Some are over here, some are over here, some are here, some are here. So we go busser the houses which are even further away, just as long as they're again within the frame of 70 2/3 amos. Okay. So therefore that's part of the city. If a person made a neder from a house, also min hagaf lifnim. It's interesting why it says this here, not the Mishnah before. But a person makes a neder from a house, not only is not allowed to go into the house, he's also not allowed to go from the door frame inward. which we'll discuss exactly what that means, and does that apply to all dinim as well. So Gemara. So Minoan the ibur the masa kamasa dami. How do we know that the ibur the masa of the city is considered like the city itself? So Rabbi Yochanan Merkra, because the pasuk says in Sefer Yeshua, so it was talking about when the Bnei Israel were about to conquer Yericho, which has a huge wall, and it says Yeshua was in Yericho. So my Yericho, Elim Yericho Mamash, he was in there, but except Yericho Sagaris Masugaris. It was completely closed up. It was a huge wall. There's no way that he was inside. So what does it mean he was bi Yericho? El Shema bi Ibura. He was within the Ibura. So the fact that he was within the 70 2/3 almos, that's already ki'u like he was in the city. And therefore the Ibura is ki'u like the city. So Ema fil b'tchoima. So maybe even within 2,000 almos. When it says the tchum, it says umadoschem and its measure michutz le'ir, from outside the city. So since it says the words chutz le'ir, so it shows that it's not considered to be part of the city. Question 2. So the reason why is in Yeshua it says that the tchum, it says umadoschem chutz le'ir. Ibur, it says v'yibiyos Yeshua bi Yericho, and you can't say that he was actually in Yericho because there was this huge wall. Okay, fine. Weiter. So then the Gemara says, "Nedarim abayis enu osir element ha'agaf lifnim." Made in Neder regarding a house, it's only you're not allowed to go from the door frame in. Avol min ha'agaf l'chutz. Whoa, but sounds like from the door frame outward, it's not a problem. It's just you can't be within the door frame. If you imagine you have let's say you have a very large door frame, and the door shuts in the middle, and you have this overhang, so you can be on this side, even though the door frame extends a little bit. L'chayra, this is something which is acceptable, even though you're still within the door frame, but it's on the outside of where the door closes. So Meiseh Mari. So he asked the kasha. The pasuk says in Vayikra, "Vayatza hakayin min habayis." It says that the kayin, when he examines the house, he's supposed to leave the house. So Yachol yelech lebeisoi vayaskir. You think that he should leave the house entirely, then close the door. Talmud Lomer el pesach habayis. He needs to actually be by the opening of the door. He can't just leave. Says the Ran, Damashma, Chisarch Lamoid al Pesach Mishas Hasager. He has to actually be there when the door is closed. Now, El Pesach Habayas Yachol Yamatachas Hamashka Vyasker. Maybe he mamish has to stand underneath the lintel and close it. Talmud Lemer Min Habayas. He has to distance himself from the entirety of the house. HaKetzad. So how do we understand this? So Oymid B'tzad Hamashkayv, he should stand next to the lintel, the Yasker, and close it. How do we know if he went to his house? The Hisker, and he closed it. He was underneath the lintel. The Hisker, and he closed his Shiskiras, it works. Talmud Lemer, the Hisker is Abayas, Mikol Makoim. So what do we see? So this is a kasha. He must leave the entire door frame. That's what it says clearly. That's what he's supposed to do. But our Mishnah said only from the door frame, but with a closed door, and outside should be okay for a Kohen and Saras. So why, when it comes to a Kohen and Saras, it's not okay, that area? But by our Mishnah, we're talking about Nedarim, that we're talking about that it is okay. So our answer is Shani Bias, Gabi Bias, Dechsiv Min Habayis. That Shietz Min Habayis Kuloi. So no, Min Habayis teaches a Kohen must be outside the entire threshold. So by Saras, he must be completely outside of the threshold. But here by Nedarim, even partially is acceptable. Okay, let's see if there's another question. Otherwise, we will stop here. Ad Kan.